Saturday, June 19th, 2004, began as a perfect family day for the Sullivans. Rachel Sullivan had packed their blue Honda Civic with beach chairs, sandwiches, and enough sunscreen to protect her fair-skinned family from the intense Florida sun. Her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, bounced excitedly in the back seat, chattering about the sandcastles she planned to build at Clearwater Beach. "Mom, can we stay until sunset?" Lily asked, her green eyes sparkling with anticipation. "I want to find shells for my collection, and Dad promised to teach me how to body surf." Rachel glanced at her husband Mark through the rearview mirror. After 6 months of unemployment following the closure of his construction company, Mark had finally landed a new job starting Monday. This beach trip was their celebration and their last family day before he returned to the demanding schedule of a working father. "We'll stay as long as you want, Princess," Mark replied, reaching over to ruffle Lily's strawberry blonde hair. "Today is all about making memories." The Sullivan family had moved to Clearwater 3 years earlier when Mark's previous job had transferred them from Ohio. They'd chosen Florida for its year-round outdoor lifestyle, hoping to give Lily the kind of childhood filled with beach days and sunshine that neither parent had experienced growing up in the Midwest. Clearwater Beach on a Saturday in June was exactly what tourists imagined when they dreamed of Florida paradise. The white sand stretched for miles, dotted with colorful umbrellas and families enjoying the weekend. The Gulf of Mexico sparkled turquoise under the morning sun, with gentle waves that were perfect for children to play in safely. The Sullivans found their perfect spot, about 50 yards from the main lifeguard tower, close enough to feel secure, but far enough from the crowd to spread out comfortably. Mark set up their large umbrella, while Rachel organized their supplies, and Lily immediately began digging in the sand with her bright pink bucket and shovel. "This is the spot for my castle," Lily announced seriously, marking out a territory near their chairs. "It's going to have 4 towers and a moat that goes all the way around." Rachel watched her daughter with the mixture of love and worry that had become constant since Lily's birth. As an only child, born after several miscarriages, Lily was precious beyond measure to both parents. Rachel had developed what Mark sometimes called helicopter mom syndrome, always keeping Lily within sight and worrying about every potential danger. "I'm going to get some drinks from the snack bar," Mark announced around noon, after they'd spent the morning swimming and building an elaborate sand city. "The cooler ice is melting and it's getting hot." "I'll come with you," Rachel started to say, but Lily looked up from her architectural project with pleading eyes. "Mom, please don't leave. I'm right at the best part. If I stop now, the tower will collapse." The snack bar was visible from their beach spot, maybe a 2-minute walk along the sand. Rachel could see Mark's red Tampa Bay Buccaneers t-shirt clearly as he waited in line. Other families were scattered around them, creating a safe, populated environment. "Okay, sweetie, but you stay right here under the umbrella," Rachel said, applying more sunscreen to Lily's shoulders. "Don't go near the water without Dad or me, and don't talk to any strangers." "I know, Mom. I'm not a baby," Lily replied, with the exasperated tone of an 8-year-old who'd heard these warnings countless times. Rachel settled into her beach chair with a romance novel, positioning herself so she could watch both Lily and the snack bar where Mark was ordering drinks. The beach was busy but not crowded, with the comfortable buzz of families enjoying their Saturday. For the next few minutes, everything was perfect. Lily worked intently on her sandcastle, occasionally holding up a seashell to show Rachel before incorporating it into her design. Rachel read a few pages while keeping one eye on her daughter and the other on Mark's progress at the snack bar. At 12:23 p.m., according to Rachel's later testimony to police, she looked up from her book to check on Lily and saw that her daughter was talking to someone. A woman in a white sundress and large sun hat was crouched down next to Lily's sandcastle, pointing at something in the sand. Rachel's mother instincts immediately went on alert. She closed her book and stood up to get a better view of the interaction. The woman appeared to be middle-aged with dark hair, visible beneath her hat, and she was wearing oversized sunglasses that obscured most of her face. "Lily," Rachel called out, her voice carrying the authoritative tone that mothers use when they want their children to come immediately. Both Lily and the woman looked up at Rachel's call. The woman waved in a friendly manner and said something to Lily that Rachel couldn't hear over the beach noise. Then she stood up and walked away, heading toward the parking area behind the beach. "Who was that lady, honey?" Rachel asked when she reached Lily's sandcastle. "She said my castle was really pretty," Lily replied, continuing to work on her moat. "She asked if I made it all by myself, and I told her yes. She said I was very talented." "What else did she say?" "Nothing really. She was just being nice. She said she had a little girl who loves building sandcastles too." Rachel felt the familiar flutter of parental anxiety, but tried to stay calm. The interaction had seemed innocent enough, and the woman had left when called upon. Still, something about the encounter felt off, though she couldn't articulate exactly what bothered her. Mark returned with cold drinks and noticed Rachel's concerned expression immediately. After 12 years of marriage, he could read her moods perfectly. "Everything okay?" he asked, handing out bottles of water and sports drinks. A woman was talking to Lily. "Probably nothing, but you know how I get." Mark looked around the beach, scanning for anyone who might seem out of place or threatening. "What did she look like?" "White sundress, sun hat, dark hair. She walked toward the parking lot when I called Lily." "Did you see which way she went?" "No, there were too many people." Mark surveyed the beach more carefully, using his construction background to systematically examine the area like he would a job site. Everything appeared normal. Families playing in the sand, teenagers playing volleyball, couples walking hand in hand along the water's edge. "Probably just someone being friendly," Mark concluded, though he made a mental note to keep a closer eye on their surroundings. The Sullivan family spent the next 2 hours enjoying what would later be remembered as their last perfect afternoon together. They built sandcastles, played in the waves, and shared a lunch of peanut butter sandwiches and fruit that Rachel had packed that morning. Around 2:30 p.m., the beach began to get more crowded as the afternoon crowd arrived. Lily was getting tired from the sun and excitement, so they decided to pack up their things and head home. Mark and Rachel worked together to gather their belongings, while Lily took one last walk along the water's edge to look for shells. "Stay where we can see you," Rachel called out as Lily skipped toward the waves, her pink bucket swinging in her hand. The beach was busier now, with more people moving around, children running between families, and teenagers playing music. The organized, quiet atmosphere of the morning had given way to typical Saturday afternoon beach chaos. Rachel was folding beach towels when she realized she couldn't see Lily's bright pink swimsuit among the people near the water's edge. She stood up on her tiptoes, scanning the area where Lily had been walking just moments before. "Mark, do you see Lily?" Rachel asked, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. Mark dropped the beach chairs he'd been carrying and immediately began searching the area. "She was right there a second ago. Lily!" he called out loudly. They both ran toward the water, calling Lily's name and asking other beachgoers if they'd seen a little girl in a pink swimsuit. The next few minutes passed in a blur of increasing desperation as they realized that Lily was nowhere to be found. "She couldn't have just disappeared," Rachel said, her voice rising with hysteria. "She was right there. We could see her." A nearby family overheard their distress and offered to help search. Within minutes, a dozen strangers were walking the beach, calling Lily's name and checking behind beach umbrellas and portable tents where a small child might hide. Mark ran to the lifeguard tower while Rachel searched the bathrooms and snack bar area. The lifeguard, a college-aged young man named Tyler, immediately radioed for backup and began coordinating a more systematic search of the beach. "When did you last see her?" Tyler asked, pulling out an incident report form. Maybe 5 minutes ago, Rachel replied, though the exact timing was already becoming unclear in her panic. She was looking for shells right along the waterline. What was she wearing? Pink one-piece swimsuit, white shorts over it, and she was carrying a pink bucket. Tyler radioed the description to other lifeguards and to the beach patrol officers who were already en route. Within 15 minutes of Lily's disappearance being reported, Clearwater Beach was swarming with law enforcement officers and emergency personnel. Detective Sarah Chen of the Clearwater Police Department arrived at 3:47 p.m. and immediately took charge of the investigation. With 15 years of experience in missing persons cases, she knew that the first few hours were critical in finding a missing child. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, I need you to think very carefully about the last few hours," Detective Chen said, her voice calm but urgent. "Tell me everything you remember about today, starting from when you arrived at the beach." Rachel and Mark recounted their day minute by minute, with Detective Chen taking detailed notes about timing, locations, and anyone they'd interacted with. When Rachel mentioned the woman in the white sundress who had talked to Lily earlier, Detective Chen's attention sharpened. "Can you describe this woman in more detail?" "Medium height, maybe 5'5" or 5'6", dark hair under a wide-brimmed sun hat. White sundress, looked expensive, large sunglasses. She seemed friendly, but there was something... Something what? "I don't know, maybe nothing, but when I called Lily, the woman left quickly, not running, but she definitely walked away purposefully." Detective Chen immediately radioed for additional officers to search the parking areas and nearby streets. She also requested that beach surveillance cameras be pulled for review, though she knew that most beach areas had limited camera coverage. The search expanded rapidly as the afternoon progressed. Police officers questioned everyone still on the beach, asking if they'd seen Lily or noticed anything unusual. Beach patrol officers searched every bathroom, snack bar, and potential hiding place. Dive teams were called in to search the water, though there was no evidence that Lily had gone into the Gulf. By 6 p.m., as the sun began to set over Clearwater Beach, there was still no trace of 8-year-old Lily Sullivan. The beach, that had been filled with family fun that morning, had become a crime scene, with yellow tape blocking off areas and investigators photographing footprints in the sand. The Amber Alert for Lily was issued at 6:34 p.m., broadcasting her description across Florida and neighboring states. Local news crews arrived and began broadcasting live reports about the missing girl, showing recent photos provided by her desperate parents. "If anyone has seen this little girl or has any information about her disappearance, please contact the Clearwater Police immediately," the news anchor reported as Lily's school photo filled television screens across the Tampa Bay area. As night fell over Clearwater Beach, the official search was suspended until morning due to safety concerns, though volunteers continued looking with flashlights. Rachel and Mark Sullivan sat in their car in the beach parking lot, unable to leave the last place they'd seen their daughter. "She didn't just vanish," Rachel whispered to Mark, clutching Lily's favorite stuffed animal that had been left in their beach bag. "Someone took her. Someone planned this." Mark held his wife while she cried, both of them staring out at the dark ocean where their perfect family day had turned into their worst nightmare. Neither of them could have imagined that it would be 20 years before they would learn the truth about what had happened to their precious Lily. Detective Chen worked through the night, coordinating with the FBI Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team and following up on the few leads they had. The woman in the white sundress had become their primary person of interest, but despite extensive canvassing and camera reviews, no one had gotten a clear look at her face or seen which direction she'd gone after leaving the beach. The investigation into Lily Sullivan's disappearance was just beginning, and it would become one of the most extensive and heartbreaking missing child cases in Florida's history. What no one knew on that devastating Saturday evening was that Lily was already hundreds of miles away, beginning a new life with a new name in a place where no one would think to look for a missing child from a Florida beach. The truth about what happened to Lily Sullivan would remain hidden for 2 decades, buried beneath layers of false documents, changed identities, and a network of people who believed they were saving children rather than destroying families. The search for answers would consume the Sullivan family and law enforcement for years to come, until a chance discovery in a California church bulletin would finally provide the key to solving one of the most baffling disappearances in recent memory. The first 48 hours after Lily's disappearance established a pattern that would define the Sullivan family's life for the next 2 decades. Every lead, no matter how small or unlikely, was pursued with desperate intensity. Every phone call could be the one that brought their daughter home. Every knock at the door might be a detective with news. Detective Sarah Chen had seen families destroyed by the agony of a missing child, and she was determined not to let the Sullivans become another statistic. The case consumed her professional life as she coordinated with federal agents, followed up on hundreds of tips, and slowly built a profile of what might have happened to 8-year-old Lily. The investigation's first major breakthrough came 3 days after the disappearance, when beach surveillance cameras finally yielded a crucial image. A traffic camera positioned at the beach exit had captured a partial view of the woman in the white sundress walking toward the parking area at approximately 12:30 p.m. on the day Lily vanished. "We can see her from behind, but the hat and sunglasses make identification nearly impossible," Detective Chen explained to the Sullivans during a briefing at the police station. "However, we can tell she's carrying something that wasn't visible when witnesses first saw her talking to Lily." The enhancement specialists had isolated an image showing the woman carrying what appeared to be a small backpack or large purse that hadn't been noticed during the initial investigation. More importantly, there seemed to be something bright pink protruding from the bag. "Pink, like Lily's bucket?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's possible. We're having the image analyzed by FBI specialists to see if we can determine what she's carrying." The FBI had taken over the case within 72 hours of the disappearance, classifying it as a likely abduction based on the witness accounts of the mysterious woman and the lack of any evidence that Lily had wandered off on her own. Agent Michael Torres, a veteran of the Bureau's Child Abduction and Serial Killer Unit, became the lead federal investigator. Agent Torres brought a methodical approach that both comforted and frustrated the Sullivan family. Every detail was examined, every timeline verified, every witness re-interviewed. The investigation expanded to include analysis of similar cases across the Southeast, looking for patterns that might indicate a serial abductor. "Child abductions by strangers are relatively rare," Agent Torres explained during one of many briefings. "When they do occur, there's usually evidence of planning and preparation. The person who took Lily likely watched your family, possibly for days or weeks before acting." This revelation sent chills through Rachel and Mark. The idea that someone had been watching their daughter, planning to take her, made them question every trip to the beach, every playground visit, every normal childhood activity they'd shared with Lily. The case generated significant media attention throughout the summer of 2004. Lily's school photo appeared on milk cartons and missing child websites. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created age progression images showing what Lily might look like as she grew older. Television shows featured her case, generating thousands of tips from across the country. Most of these tips led nowhere. Alleged sightings in shopping malls, amusement parks, and other public places were investigated thoroughly, but none produced credible evidence. The Sullivans chased each lead with desperate hope, traveling to other states to view surveillance footage or meet with witnesses who thought they'd seen their daughter. One of the most promising leads came 6 months after the disappearance, when a teacher in Georgia reported seeing a girl who strongly resembled Lily in her classroom. The child had enrolled under the name Grace Miller, with documentation showing she'd moved from North Carolina with her aunt after her parents had died in a car accident. Rachel and Mark drove to Georgia immediately, their hearts pounding with hope and terror. When they arrived at the school and observed the girl from a distance, the resemblance was indeed striking. She had Lily's strawberry blonde hair and general build, though she seemed quieter and more withdrawn than their energetic daughter had been. "That's her," Rachel whispered to Mark as they watched the girl during recess. "I know it's her. Look at the way she tilts her head when she's thinking." However, further investigation revealed that Grace Miller had a complete medical history dating back to birth, including vaccination records and hospital visits that predated Lily's disappearance. DNA testing eventually confirmed that despite the physical resemblance, this was not their missing daughter. The Georgia incident was devastating for the Sullivans, but it also provided important information for the investigation. The false documentation for Grace Miller was sophisticated and professionally created, suggesting that whoever had taken Lily had access to resources for creating new identities. "We're looking at someone with significant resources," Agent Torres told Detective Chen during a case review. "This isn't a crime of opportunity by someone with mental illness. The planning, the execution, the ability to disappear without a trace, it suggests organization and funding." The investigation began to focus on child trafficking networks and illegal adoption rings. These organizations, while rare, were known to target children from stable families, believing they could provide better homes for children they deemed at risk or unwanted. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a psychologist specializing in family trauma, was brought in to help the Sullivans cope with the ongoing stress of the investigation. She also provided insights into the psychological profile of Lily's likely abductor. "Based on the interaction with Lily at the beach, we're probably looking at someone who genuinely believes they're helping children," Dr. Harper explained. "They may have convinced themselves that they're rescuing Lily from some perceived danger or inadequacy in her home situation." This psychological profile was both comforting and terrifying for Rachel and Mark. The idea that someone might be caring for Lily, believing they were providing a better life, offered hope that she was safe and loved. However, it also suggested that Lily might be being raised to believe that her abduction was actually a rescue, making her unlikely to seek help or reveal her true identity. As months turned to years, the active investigation began to wind down. New cases demanded attention, and leads in Lily's case became increasingly rare and less credible. Detective Chen was promoted to sergeant, but continued working the case in her spare time, unable to let go of the mystery that had defined her career. The Sullivans struggled to rebuild their lives while maintaining hope for Lily's return. Mark returned to work, but found it difficult to concentrate. Rachel developed severe anxiety and depression, requiring medication and therapy to function. Their marriage, once strong and loving, began to show strain under the constant pressure of grief and uncertainty. "We can't give up looking for her," Rachel insisted during couples therapy sessions. "She's out there somewhere, and she needs us to find her." "But we can't live like this forever," Mark replied, his own pain evident. "We've spent 3 years consumed by this search. We need to find a way to honor Lily's memory while still having a life." The question of whether to have another child became a source of significant tension. Rachel couldn't bear the thought of replacing Lily, while Mark worried that their intense focus on their missing daughter was preventing them from healing and moving forward. By 2008, 4 years after Lily's disappearance, the official investigation had been scaled back significantly. The case remained open, and tips were still investigated, but the day-to-day search efforts had ended. The Sullivans had exhausted their savings on private investigators, psychics, and travel expenses related to following leads. However, they continued their own search efforts. Rachel had become an expert in missing children cases, networking with other families and learning about investigative techniques. She maintained a website about Lily's case, updating it regularly with new information and age progression photos. "Someone out there knows what happened to our daughter," Rachel wrote in a blog post on the 5th anniversary of Lily's disappearance. "Someone saw something, heard something, or knows something that could bring her home. We will never stop looking for her." The case attracted the attention of amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts online. Various forums discussed theories about what might have happened to Lily, ranging from plausible scenarios involving trafficking networks to wild conspiracy theories about government cover-ups. One persistent theory suggested that Lily had been taken by a religious organization that believed they were saving children from secular families. This theory was based on several similar cases from the 1990s and early 2000s, where children had disappeared under similar circumstances and were later found living with religious communities under assumed names. Detective Chen, now Sergeant Chen, found this theory compelling enough to investigate further. She contacted law enforcement agencies in states with large religious communities, sharing Lily's information and asking them to be alert for any children who might match her description. These groups often believe they're doing God's work by rescuing children from families they deem unworthy, Sergeant Chen explained to Agent Torres during a 2009 case review. They create complete new identities for the children and raise them within their community, sometimes moving them across state lines to avoid detection. This line of investigation led to some promising leads, but ultimately no concrete evidence. Several religious communities were investigated, but none yielded any trace of Lily or anyone matching her description. The 10th anniversary of Lily's disappearance in 2014 brought renewed media attention to the case. Local television stations ran retrospective stories, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released new age progression images showing what Lily might look like as an 18-year-old. She would be graduating from high school this year, Rachel told a television reporter, holding the age progression photo with trembling hands. She wanted to be a marine biologist when she grew up. She loved the ocean so much. The anniversary also marked a turning point for the Sullivan family. After a decade of intensive searching, they made the difficult decision to try to rebuild their lives while maintaining hope for Lily's return. Mark had started his own construction company, partly as a way to stay busy and partly to provide financial stability for their continued search efforts. Rachel became involved with organizations supporting families of missing children, channeling her pain into helping others navigate the complex emotions and practical challenges of having a missing child. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and provided support for newly affected families. "The hardest part isn't the not knowing," Rachel explained to a support group in 2015. "It's the having to continue living while a piece of your heart is missing. You have to find a way to honor your missing child while still honoring the life you have left." As technology advanced, new investigative techniques became available. DNA databases expanded, facial recognition software improved, and social media provided new ways to share information about missing children. The Sullivans embraced each new tool, hoping it might be the key to finding Lily. In 2018, they participated in a groundbreaking study using advanced DNA analysis to identify potential relatives of missing children. The study compared DNA from families of missing children with samples from unidentified individuals, hoping to establish connections that might lead to identifications. "Even if we find out that Lily is gone, we need to know," Mark explained to the researchers. "This uncertainty is destroying what's left of our family." The DNA study didn't produce any matches for Lily, but it did lead to several other missing children being identified and families receiving closure. The Sullivans found some comfort in knowing their participation had helped other families, even if it didn't bring them answers about their own daughter. By 2020, 16 years after Lily's disappearance, the case had become one of the longest-running missing child investigations in Florida history. New detectives had taken over from Sergeant Chen, who had retired but continued to work the case as a volunteer consultant. The COVID-19 pandemic actually provided an unexpected boost to the investigation, as people spent more time online and became more engaged with true crime content. Lily's case was featured in several popular podcasts and YouTube channels, generating new tips and renewed interest from amateur investigators. One podcast episode featured an interview with a former social worker who suggested that Lily might have been placed with a family through unofficial adoption channels. These grey market adoptions sometimes involve children who were taken or given up under questionable circumstances, but were placed with families who genuinely believed the adoptions were legal. The adoptive families in these cases are usually completely innocent, the social worker explained. They're told the child's parents died or were unable to care for them. They create loving homes for these children, never knowing they're actually harboring kidnapping victims. This theory gave the Sullivans new hope and a new direction for their search. They began reaching out to adoption support groups and agencies, sharing Lily's story and asking adoptive families to consider whether their children might have been acquired through questionable means. The search had become a way of life for the Sullivan family. 20 years after that perfect Saturday at Clearwater Beach turned into their worst nightmare, they had never stopped believing that Lily was alive somewhere, possibly unaware of her true identity. Rachel had aged visibly during the 2 decades of searching. Her hair had gone grey, and stress lines marked her face, but her determination remained as fierce as ever. She had become a recognized expert on missing children cases and had helped dozens of other families navigate their own searches. Mark had channeled his energy into his business and into supporting other families of missing children. He had become a quiet but steadfast advocate for improved investigation techniques and better support systems for affected families. Their marriage had survived the strain, though it bore the scars of 20 years of shared trauma. They had learned to support each other through the worst moments while maintaining their individual ways of coping with the loss. "We're not the same people we were before Lily disappeared," Rachel reflected during a 2024 interview marking the 20th anniversary of the disappearance. "We've been shaped by this experience in ways we never could have imagined. But we're still here, we're still fighting, and we still believe she's out there somewhere." What the Sullivans didn't know as they marked that 20th anniversary was that their years of searching were about to pay off in the most unexpected way possible. Hundreds of miles away in California, a woman named Grace Miller was volunteering at her church, unaware that her photo in the weekly bulletin was about to solve one of the most enduring missing child cases in American history. The truth about what had happened to 8-year-old Lily Sullivan was about to emerge from the most unlikely of sources, validating everything her parents had believed about her fate while revealing a story more complex and heartbreaking than they could have ever imagined. The discovery that would finally solve the 20-year mystery of Lily Sullivan's disappearance came from the most unexpected source imaginable: a routine church bulletin in San Diego, California. On Sunday morning, March 17, 2024, Rachel Sullivan was visiting her sister Janet for her birthday weekend when she picked up a copy of the weekly bulletin from Sacred Heart Community Church. Rachel had maintained the habit of scanning missing persons databases and social media for any trace of Lily, but she'd never thought to look through random church publications in distant cities. It was pure coincidence that brought her to Sacred Heart that morning. Janet's neighbor had invited them to attend the contemporary service, and Rachel had agreed mainly to be polite. As she flipped through the bulletin during the opening hymn, Rachel's eyes stopped on a page featuring volunteer spotlights. 3 photos showed church members being recognized for their community service work. The middle photo showed a young woman with strawberry blonde hair and green eyes, identified as Grace Miller, 28, our outstanding coordinator for the children's ministry. The woman in the photo was beautiful, with a serene smile and an unmistakable tilt to her head that Rachel recognized immediately. It was a gesture Lily had made constantly as a child, tilting her head slightly to the right when she was thinking or listening carefully. Rachel's hands began shaking so violently that she dropped the bulletin. The sound of paper hitting the pew floor seemed deafeningly loud in the quiet church. Janet looked over with concern, then followed her sister's stunned gaze to the fallen bulletin. "Rachel, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "That's her," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible over the organ music. "That's Lily." Janet picked up the bulletin and looked at the photo Rachel was pointing to. Even she, who hadn't seen her niece in 20 years, could see the resemblance. The bone structure, the hair color, the distinctive green eyes. It was unmistakably similar to what the age progression photos had predicted Lily would look like as an adult. "Are you sure? After all this time, could you really be certain? Look at how she's tilting her head. Look at her eyes. That's my daughter, Janet. That's my baby." Rachel stood up abruptly, causing several churchgoers to turn and stare. She needed air, needed space to think, needed to figure out what to do with this impossible discovery. Janet followed her outside, where Rachel collapsed onto a bench in the church garden. "We need to call the police," Rachel said, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. "We need to call Detective Morrison in Clearwater. We need to—" "Rachel, slow down," Janet interrupted gently. "Think about this. Even if that woman is Lily, you can't just walk up to her and announce that she's your missing daughter. She's lived 20 years with a different identity. This needs to be handled carefully." But Rachel was already dialing the number she'd memorized decades ago. Detective Morrison had taken over Lily's case 3 years earlier when the previous detective retired. She was young, energetic, and had brought fresh eyes to the cold case. "Detective Morrison, this is Rachel Sullivan. I think I found her. I think I found Lily." Detective Morrison had received similar calls from the Sullivan family dozens of times over the years, but something in Rachel's voice was different this time. She was calm, certain, not hysterical with false hope like previous occasions. "Where are you, Mrs. Sullivan, and what makes you think you've found her?" Rachel explained about the church bulletin and described the photo. She used her phone to take a picture of the bulletin page and sent it to Detective Morrison immediately. "I need you to stay exactly where you are," Detective Morrison instructed after reviewing the photo. "Don't approach this woman. Don't contact the church. Don't do anything until I can coordinate with San Diego authorities. If this is really Lily, we need to handle this properly." The next few hours were the longest of Rachel's life. She and Janet sat in the church parking lot, watching as people filed out after the service, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who might be Lily. They saw families with children, elderly couples, young professionals, but no sign of the strawberry blonde woman from the bulletin photo. Detective Morrison worked frantically from Florida, contacting the San Diego Police Department and requesting immediate assistance with what could be a major break in a 20-year-old kidnapping case. The San Diego authorities were initially skeptical. They'd handled false alarms about missing children before, but the details of Lily's case and the striking resemblance in the photo convinced them to take the situation seriously. By Monday morning, Detective Morrison was on a plane to California, carrying copies of Lily's DNA profile, dental records, and every piece of evidence from the original investigation. She'd also brought along Dr. Harper, the psychologist who had worked with the Sullivan family, knowing that reuniting a kidnapping victim with their family after 20 years would require careful psychological preparation. The San Diego police assigned Detective Carlos Ruiz to assist with the investigation. His first task was to locate Grace Miller and learn more about her background without alerting her to the investigation. Church records showed that Grace Miller had been attending Sacred Heart for 5 years. She lived alone in a modest apartment in the Hillcrest neighborhood and worked as an elementary school teacher. Her emergency contact was listed as Martha Miller, described as her aunt and guardian. According to the church administrator, Grace is one of their most dedicated volunteers, Detective Ruiz reported. She works with children, coordinates community outreach programs, and is generally described as kind, gentle, and deeply religious. No one knows much about her background before she moved to San Diego. A background check revealed that Grace Miller's Social Security number had been issued when she was 14 years old, which was unusual, but not impossible for someone who had been living off-grid with relatives. Her educational records showed she had been homeschooled through high school and had attended a small Christian college in Oregon before moving to California. Most importantly, there was no record of Grace Miller existing before age 14, exactly 6 years after Lily Sullivan had disappeared from a Florida beach. Detective Morrison and Dr. Harper arrived in San Diego on Tuesday evening. They met with local authorities to plan their approach carefully. The goal was to confirm Grace's identity through DNA testing while preparing for the psychological impact of what they might discover. If this woman is Lily Sullivan, she's lived her entire adult life believing she's someone else, Dr. Harper explained to the team. She may have no memory of her life before the abduction, or she may have been told stories that make her believe her current identity is real. This revelation could be extremely traumatic. The team decided that the best approach would be to make contact with Grace through her work at the elementary school, posing as part of a routine background check for a child advocacy program. This would allow them to meet her without raising suspicions and potentially obtain a DNA sample. On Wednesday morning, Detective Ruiz visited Grace's school and requested to speak with her about her volunteer work with children. Grace was called to the main office, where she met the detective with a warm smile and obvious willingness to help. "I understand you work extensively with children both at your school and at Sacred Heart Church." Detective Ruiz began, studying Grace's face carefully for any resemblance to the photos of Lily Sullivan. "Yes, I love working with kids," Grace replied, her voice soft and gentle. "Children are such pure souls. I feel called to protect and nurture them however I can." As she spoke, Detective Ruiz noted the distinctive head tilt that Rachel Sullivan had mentioned, along with the green eyes and facial structure that matched the age progression photos. Even more compelling was a small scar on Grace's left hand that matched a scar Lily had from falling off her bicycle when she was 6. "We're conducting background checks on people who work with children as part of a new safety initiative," Detective Ruiz explained. "Would you be willing to provide a DNA sample? It's just a simple cheek swab." Grace agreed without hesitation, having nothing to hide and wanting to cooperate with child safety measures. She provided the DNA sample and answered basic questions about her background, repeating the story she'd apparently been told about her parents dying when she was young and being raised by her Aunt Martha. The DNA sample was rushed to a laboratory for emergency processing, with results expected within 48 hours. Detective Morrison spent this waiting period preparing the Sullivan family for what they might learn and developing a plan for how to handle the situation if Grace was confirmed to be Lily. On Friday morning, the DNA results came back with a 99.97% probability that Grace Miller was indeed Lily Sullivan. 20 years after her disappearance from a Florida beach, she had been found living a quiet, productive life as an elementary school teacher in California. Detective Morrison called Rachel and Mark Sullivan with the news they'd been praying to hear for 2 decades. "We found her," Detective Morrison said simply. Lily is alive, she's safe, and she's living in San Diego under the name Grace Miller. Rachel collapsed into Mark's arms, both of them crying with relief, joy, and 20 years of pent-up emotion. Their daughter was alive. After 2 decades of not knowing, of imagining the worst, of hoping against hope, they finally had confirmation that Lily had survived. But the joy was tempered by the complexity of the situation. Lily, Grace, had no idea who she really was. She believed her parents were dead and that she'd been lovingly raised by her Aunt Martha. Revealing the truth would shatter her entire understanding of her life and identity. Dr. Harper worked with local psychologists to develop a careful plan for revealing Grace's true identity. The process would need to be gradual, supportive, and sensitive to the enormous psychological impact of learning that her entire life had been built on lies. The first step was to locate and arrest Martha Miller, the woman who had been posing as Grace's aunt for 20 years. Investigation revealed that Martha Miller was actually Margaret Whitfield, a former social worker who had been involved with the religious organization that believed they were rescuing children from secular families. Margaret had been part of a network that operated in the early 2000s, taking children they believed were at risk and placing them with deeply religious families who thought they were participating in legitimate adoptions. The organization had been shut down by federal authorities in 2007, but many of the children they had taken were never found because their identities had been so thoroughly altered. Margaret Whitfield genuinely believed she was saving these children, Detective Morrison explained to the Sullivan family. She and her associates saw families like yours as spiritually inadequate and believed they were providing these children with better, more godly homes. Margaret had taken 8-year-old Lily from the beach that day, drugged her to keep her quiet during transport, and driven her across the country to a safe house operated by the religious network. Lily's identity had been completely erased and replaced with the Grace Miller persona, complete with a fabricated backstory about dead parents and a loving aunt. The psychological manipulation had been sophisticated and thorough. Lily had been told repeatedly that her real parents had been dangerous people who couldn't properly care for her, and that Martha was her salvation. Over time, these false memories had replaced her real ones, especially given how young she'd been when taken. When authorities arrested Margaret Whitfield at her home in Oregon, she showed no remorse for her actions. Even at 73 years old, she remained convinced that she had saved Grace from a spiritually deficient family. I gave that child a chance at a godly life, Margaret told investigators during her interrogation. Her parents were raising her in sin and secularism. I provided her with proper Christian values and a loving home. The process of revealing the truth to Grace began gradually. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a specialist in recovered memory and identity trauma, was brought in to work with Grace over several sessions before the full truth was revealed. Grace, we need to talk about some information that's come to light about your background, Dr. Jenkins began during their first session. Some of what you've been told about your past may not be accurate. The revelation process took place over several days, with Grace learning piece by piece that her Aunt Martha was not her biological relative, that her parents hadn't died in a car accident, and that she had been taken from her family as a child. The moment when Grace learned her true identity was heartbreaking. 20 years of false memories collided with the reality of her situation, leaving her confused, angry, and emotionally devastated. You're telling me that everything I believed about my life is a lie? Grace asked Dr. Jenkins, her voice hollow with shock. My parents are alive? I was kidnapped? The woman I called my aunt for 20 years is actually my abductor? The psychological impact was enormous. Grace experienced what Dr. Jenkins described as identity fragmentation. Her sense of self had been built on false information, and learning the truth created a crisis that required intensive therapeutic support. Meanwhile, Rachel and Mark Sullivan waited in agony for the moment when they would be reunited with their daughter. They understood that Grace needed time to process the truth and prepare for meeting them. But after 20 years of separation, every additional day felt like an eternity. The reunion was finally arranged 2 weeks after Grace learned her true identity. It took place in a controlled environment at the San Diego Police Department, with Dr. Jenkins and Detective Morrison present to provide support. When Grace walked into the room and saw her biological parents for the first time in 20 years, the emotional impact was overwhelming for everyone present. Rachel and Mark saw their 8-year-old daughter in Grace's face, while Grace looked at these strangers who were genetically her family, but felt like complete foreigners. "I want to remember you," Grace said through tears, "but I don't. I'm sorry, but I don't remember being Lily." "That's okay, sweetheart," Rachel replied, fighting every instinct to rush forward and embrace her daughter. "We have time. We have all the time in the world to help you remember or to make new memories if the old ones don't come back." The reunion was the beginning of a long healing process for everyone involved. Grace needed time to reconcile her identity as Grace Miller with the truth about being Lily Sullivan. The Sullivan family needed to accept that their daughter had grown into a woman they didn't know, with experiences and beliefs shaped by 20 years of separation. Margaret Whitfield was ultimately sentenced to life in prison for kidnapping, child endangerment, and multiple counts of fraud related to the false identity documents she had created. The religious organization she had worked with was investigated further, leading to the identification and reunion of 3 other children who had been taken under similar circumstances. Grace chose to keep her name as Grace Miller while slowly rebuilding a relationship with her biological family. The process was complicated by the fact that she had genuine love and gratitude for many aspects of the life Margaret had provided, even while recognizing the criminal nature of how that life had begun. "I can't just erase 20 years of my life," Grace explained to her parents during one of their early meetings. "The woman who took me committed a terrible crime, but she also raised me with love and taught me values that I cherish. I need to find a way to honor both truths." The Sullivan family ultimately relocated to California to be closer to Grace and to support her through the healing process. The case became a landmark example of how missing children cases could be solved even decades later, and of the complex emotional and psychological challenges involved in reuniting families after long separations. Grace never fully recovered her memories of being Lily Sullivan, but she developed a close relationship with her biological parents and came to understand the love and pain they had experienced during her absence. She continued her work as a teacher and expanded her advocacy for missing children, using her unique perspective to help other families navigate similar situations. The woman in the church bulletin had indeed been the missing 8-year-old girl from a Florida beach. After 20 years of searching, Rachel and Mark Sullivan had found their daughter alive, safe, and living a life of purpose and kindness. The discovery proved that hope, persistence, and love could overcome even the most impossible circumstances, and that families separated by tragedy could find their way back to each other even after decades of separation.